Greetings, and welcome to the first in our series of workshops on the Lean Startup Method. This workshop is part of a series of 3 workshops in which we will cover the basics of the Lean Startup approach. In this workshop, we will talk about 2 key elements of the business model canvas: customer segments and value proposition. Those are the basics, and we'll cover them now. In the next workshop, we'll cover the remaining 7 elements of the business model canvas and do each of those in some depth. Finally, in our 3rd workshop, we will do a practical, hands-on workshop in how to do customer development, and specifically that first part of customer development called customer discovery. We'll show you how to get and conduct customer-driven interviews. These workshops are built on the work of, over the last 10 years, of Steve Blank. Steve Blank is the father of the Lean Startup Method, and his ideas are captured in his 2013 book, the Startup Owner's Manual. This is, if there's one reference book that you'll need and want to have for this material, it's this book. Now, we're going to do this as a team, so let me introduce the teaching team. This is the part we'll do in section 2. So let's jump in to the first workshop. What is the basic principle behind the Lean Startup approach? What's the lean in Lean Startup? Well, the notion is that you're starting to build a startup, to build a new venture, and you're doing it in the face of uncertainty and scarce resources. Lean is a way to start your startup and work on the things that A, cost the least, and B, turn out to be the most important, and work on those first. And that turns out to be the customer discovery elements. So, what is so new about Lean Startup? How is it different from historical methods? Well, traditionally, folks thought of startups as just small companies. The way to develop startups traditionally was to start with a business plan, to do a long 5-year projection in a fairly lengthy document of all the aspects that were necessary to get the business started. Then you would develop the product. You develop the product, beta test it with customers, and then launch it into the marketplace. And what's interesting about this process is it's very linear. It was intended to be step by step, and it grew out of the methods and technologies for developing new products for existing customers. Lean Startup takes a different approach. First of all, it treats technology startups not as new businesses, but as temporary search organizations. And we'll talk about that a bit. The first thing you do then is to build a business model. That's the collection of people, processes, resources that have to be in place for the business to be successful. And rather than documenting that in a long, drawn-out business plan, we'll show you techniques for doing that crisply and easily using something called the business model canvas. Now, rather than developing the product first, what you're going to do is develop the customer first. And this is figurative language, but the notion here is to work on finding the customer and understanding the customer's need and understanding that how your product or solution helps satisfy that need. And this is a very important concept. It's worth spending some time on. What we're going to work on first is finding that match between a specific, well-defined customer and the value that you can bring to them with your product or service. This is sometimes called the product market fit, more accurately, the customer solution fit. That's what we're going to work on. Now, the first thing you're going to build in the Lean Startup Method is something called the minimum viable product. We'll talk about that at some length in this workshop. That is the small set of features, that minimum set that has value to the customer. And you're going to build that not because it's the ultimate product that you want to deliver, but again, as part of this learning process to understand what the customer really needs. Finally, the Lean Startup approach is not linear at all. It's very iterative, and you'll see we're going to go through a series of steps of hypothesizing what we think is true, testing that in the marketplace, and then revising and updating our business model as we go along. So, let's start with a quiz question. What's the definition of a startup? I hinted at that a little bit in in the last slide, but take a minute and think about what a startup really is. All right? So, a startup is a temporary organization in search of a business model that is profitable, scalable, and sustainable. Let's take a minute and decompose that a little bit and focus on the key concepts in this definition. First of all, it's a temporary organization. The startup that you're building is not the company you ultimately want to build. It's an organization that is in place to do some searching, to do discovery, to learn and to understand. It's a temporary organization that's trying to search for something and something specific, a business model. What's a business model? Business model is that collection of all the things that you need to make a successful business. It's people, processes, resources, and we'll talk about that in some detail, but it's conceptual. It's the way you think about the business, and what your startup is doing is searching for that business model. But not just any business model. The business model we're looking for is one that's profitable, sustainable, and scalable. What that means is it's one that can make money, it's one that will make money repeatably, not just a one-time thing, and something that can be scaled and grown. It can grow to new products, to new customers, to new geographies, and hopefully become a large and successful enterprise. Now, let's focus our attention on the concept of customer development. And specifically, I want to talk about that first phase of customer development, which is called customer discovery. Look at this chart for a minute. It's intended to capture the notion that you're starting off at a very early stage of discovery where you don't know very much. You think you have ideas, probably good ideas, but facts are few at this point. And you're going to go through a process of stating those hypotheses, those guesses, validating them in the marketplace so that over time the uncertainty reduces. In the course of doing that, you're going to discover that some of the things you thought were important are not important to customers. Also, you're going to discover things that you didn't think about or didn't know were important really are important to customers. And that's the heart of customer discovery. It's learning and understanding what really matters to the prospective customers. In the course of that, which we call validation, the uncertainty will reduce, but in that course of the thing, you will change. You will change your business model. You may even change your business model very dramatically. In the parlance of the lean startup, that's called a pivot, in which you change from something that you thought you were going to do into something very different. Ultimately, you get that the uncertainty reduces, you get a business model that you really are confident in, then you go into execution mode. Uncertainty is reduced, and now it's time to scale. It's time to go all in. It's time to invest in building your product, building your sales force, and building your company. That's the overall approach, and let's talk about that now some more. So, another quiz question. Why do startups fail? What is the number one reason why startups fail? This is from data from a company called CB Insights that looked at over 100 startups and found all the reasons why startups fail. So, the question for you is, what's the number one reason? Take a minute and think about it. So, if you thought that running out of money or problems with the team or losing out to competition might be the number one reason, those are all good answers, but they're not the number one reason. Number one reason why startups fail is that there is no market need for what they built. So again, in this survey, 42% of the startups that failed because they built something that there was no market for. They built something that customers didn't want. Lean startup is an approach to prevent you from making that mistake and prevent you from creating a startup that fails for that reason. Now, how are we going to do that? We're going to do that with a process of hypothesis development and testing. We're going to specify on our business model canvas, I'll show you how to do that, all of your thoughts about how the business should be structured and organized. But you have to be humble enough to understand that what you think is true is not necessarily true. Those are your hypotheses, fancy word for guesses. They may be good guesses, they may be brilliant guesses, but until you go out and verify them, test them in the marketplace, they're just guesses. So, how do you do that? The short answer is you do it from interviews, lots and lots of interviews. And especially in Workshop 3, we'll show you the techniques for doing those interviews. In short, it's a voyage of discovery. You want to get to root understanding of what the issue is for your customers. You're going to ask why. Ask why 5 times. Continue to probe in on these issues. And again, we'll show you how to do that in some detail in Workshop 3. So, what makes for a good hypothesis? A good hypothesis is QRST, not LMNOP, but QRST. It should be quantifiable. When you state your hypotheses, try to use numbers as much as you can. In this case, adverbs are not your friend. So largely, mostly, those kind of words are too indefinite. Try to get your hypotheses to be quantifiable. They need to be relevant, so get them focused on the issue at hand, not around the issue, not on larger issues, but on the key issue. They should be specific. Try to test small increments, things that are manageable. So do them one at a time, but do them specific. And of course, they must be testable. They have to be of the form where you can prove them to be true or false by doing the interviews. Okay? So, why, again, are we doing all of this? Well, there's a tendency for entrepreneurs, and especially young entrepreneurs, to want to build the ultimate product. Using an analogy here from the Swiss Army knife, most entrepreneurs want to build the ultimate Swiss Army knife, every gadget imaginable in it. And in fact, that's likely not to be the product that customers want. Even though you as a technologist or as an entrepreneur might really want to build this and might want one of these for yourself. So, what should you build first? You should build something very simple, but featured with enough features that it has value to the customers. We're going to call this the minimum viable product. So it's a set of features, a set of capabilities that has value to the customer, but that we can use for more testing and more learning. So, what is a minimum viable product? It is something that can be held, touched, or seen. It has a minimum set of features that you can use to learn from your customers. Better still, you might want to learn from that subset of early adopters, sometimes called early evangelists. These are the folks who typically are on the leading edge, who understand market trends and phenomenon before other folks. They're generally not the target market you have because there's so few of them. But you want to have something that you can put in front of prospective customers that you can use as a learning tool. Demos, prototypes, wireframes are all good, but you want to get something. You want to find something that a customer is willing to pay for. That they'll tell you, "Oh, that's valuable to me. I want one of those. Give it to me now." If you can find that level of intensity, then you've got a valuable, minimum viable product. And again, why do we do this? We do this to test and understand the customer's need. We're looking to understand their problem, the pains they might have, and understand the solution, any kind of gains that we might bring to them. Okay? So, using our Swiss Army knife analogy, eventually, using a minimum viable product, you might get to that right set of features that make for the popular Swiss Army knife. Okay? Now, I've mentioned the business model canvas several times. Let's talk about the business model canvas. Business model canvas is a device, a framework for specifying the 9 key elements of a business model. It was developed by a man named Osterwalder. It's the current standard for specifying a business model, and it's in wide use. Let's take a minute and walk through each of the 9 segments of the elements, of the business model canvas. The first 2 are by far the most important. They are the value proposition, which you see there in the middle, and the customer segments, which you see on the far right. We're going to spend all of our time in this workshop talking about those 2 elements of the business model canvas. They're the foundation. Everything that you do subsequent to that is built on those 2 elements. It's very important to get them right. If you don't have those 2 things correct, it's unlikely that your new venture will succeed. They also provide vital information to help you through the subsequent elements of the business model canvas. Together, when you have them right, you have something that's often called a product market fit. Strictly speaking, at this early stage, we should really call it customer problem fit, because we're going to look for the problem that we're trying to solve and make sure we're clear about the customers that we're solving it for. Okay? Quickly, let's touch the other elements, though those are the subject of the second workshop. The third element of the business model canvas is channels. This is how you reach your customers day to day, either selling, delivering product to them, or and for some products, how you do maintenance and ongoing servicing of the product. Fourth element is customer relationships. This is how you get, keep, and hold customers. So your advertising and marketing is all in this element. Those four elements, and in fact the right half of the canvas, are the customer-facing elements. And those first four are essential to knowing the fifth, which is the revenue streams. How do you charge? What do you charge for? How do you get money from customers? On the left side of the screen, the sixth element is key partners. These are the people outside of your organization, outside of your startup, that are essential to the success of your business. Mostly they'll be suppliers, but there are others who provide technology or other resources to you. Seventh element is the key resources. These are assets that the company has to control in order to be successful. Typically these are people, but they might also be technologies, they might be physical resources, plant and equipment, or they might be financial resources. Eighth element is the key activities. These are the short list of things that the company has to do very well to be successful. If the company is a web-based marketing company, then web development and web analytics, web-based marketing would be a key activities. These operational activities on the left side of the canvas, when taken together, then allow you to determine the ninth element, which is the cost structure. These are the main drivers of cost in the business. Taken as a whole, then, the business model canvas allows you to determine cost and revenues and ultimately the profitability, or the potential profitability of the venture. Yeah? All right, let's dig in on value proposition. Value proposition is that comparison of the perceived benefits and the perceived cost of the product or service that you intend to bring to market. Clearly, the value propositions work the best when the perceived benefit is much greater than the perceived cost. So, what's important about the value proposition? First of all, it's not about your idea or your product. It's about benefits. It's about benefits that you bring to customers. It's about the need that you're meeting, the problem you're solving, the gain that you are bringing to them. It's about what you are doing that is helping them. So to understand value proposition, you have to take on the perspective of the customer. Okay? So here's a couple of good ways to think about it. Pains and gains. Again, not the features of your product, but the benefits it's bringing to prospective customers. And there are lots of them. Painkillers are important. So if you have a product or service that's helping reduce waste or eliminate frustrations that your customer have, or fixing their problems, helping their operations or their products perform better, fixing challenges they have, or wiping out other negative social consequences, those are values that you can bring to customers. In fact, even just eliminating risk, making their lives easier, eliminating those pains are good examples of value propositions. But they don't always have to be attacking problems. They could bring upside, they could bring gains. So if you create savings, you create better outcomes, you help your customer delight their customers, you make their workflow more easy, more efficient, or create other positive consequences, even improvements in their self-image, intangible things. All of those things can be important elements of a value proposition. And it's important that you think through and really understand what is the value you're bringing to your customers. Now, let's go to the companion element, the customer segments. And clearly these go together, right? The value that you're creating has to be value that you're creating for a specific customer segment. So, what are customer segments? These are the people who will benefit from the product or service you provide and are willing to pay for it. Note, they do not exist to serve you. You exist to serve them. So again, as you think about your product or service, think about those customers and think from their perspective. Now your task as you lay out your customer segments is akin to being a cultural anthropologist. You want to know everything about them. You want to know where they live, where they eat, who their friends are, where they shop, what magazines they read. The more you know about them and their life, the better off you are, because there are so many questions that you need to answer for your business that hinge on who those customers are and what they do. Okay? You will know them. You'll know that you've got your customer segments specified well enough so that if you meet somebody in the street or at a party and you talk to them for 30 seconds, ask them a few questions, you can tell right away if they're in your customer segment or they're not. And remember, customers are people. They're not companies, they're not buildings, they're not industries. So it's not a manufacturing company, it's the head of engineering for a manufacturing company in the aerospace industry. It has to be a person to be a proper customer segment. Okay? Now let's take a minute and talk about another aspect of the customer segment element of the business model canvas, and that's the market type. You want to be knowledgeable and aware of the market type you're going into. Typically they come in 4 different kinds: existing markets, resegmented markets, new markets, and clone markets. And let's touch each of them in turn. In an existing market, the customers are known and what they want is improved performance. Existing markets are all often crowded because they're so well known, and to go into them is difficult. And it's difficult in a couple of ways, in that you have to establish yourself. You have to break through with branding and sales and create distribution systems where in the face of competitors who are already doing this very well. And so to compete with them, you have to have major leaps forward in performance. A good example of this would be Google. If you want to go into the search business now, you'd better have something that's pretty remarkable to compete with Google and the other search engines are out there. That's an existing market. Second kind of market is a resegmented market. This is where you go in and take a piece of an existing market and focus better on that subset, on that segment of the market than other people are doing. So the customers are possibly known because you know some of them but not all of them, and you're going to provide a better fit to their needs than is provided by the current competitors. There will be lots of competitors. If you're wrong, you will have a hard time competing. But if you're right, you'll be the first and maybe one of the few who are addressing this sub-segment. Again, the risk here now is that you have to be really smart about how your product or service serves that redefined segment. An example of this is Southwest Airlines. There are lots of airlines. Southwest focused on a specific subset, the low-income traveler who was willing to endure scheduling difficulties but didn't want to pay much for their airfare. Big airlines were focused more on big business flyers, and so Southwest was able to craft an offering for that sub-segment and be very successful. Third market type is a completely new market. This is one where your product or service is going to create a market. In fact, the customers in a new market typically don't know that they want your product and service. So you're going to provide something transformation to you. Now, by definition, there's nobody else in that directly in that new market, though of course there are lots of folks who will compete with you indirectly. The risk there is that you have to break through to the leading edge practitioners. You have to do what's called evangelism, and to get into the face of and into the consciousness of the people who are the leaders. A good example of this is Groupon. Groupon created the industry for flash sales and coupon offerings. Didn't exist before, and they invented it. Finally, the fourth example is clone markets. Clone markets is a bit of a degenerate example, clone market is simply taking an existing product and service and moving it into a new geography. Right? So the customers are known. What you need to know is what the local variations are. You do it by going into a region, a company where this particular product and service is not offered. Are there risks? The risks are that maybe it doesn't actually translate into this new culture. The most prominent example for this is Baidu. Baidu is Google. It's a search engine and web service provider in China. Essentially replicated what Google did in that market. Baidu right now does over 50% of the searches in China. What's important about market type? Why does it matter? It matters because the rate of customer adoption, your sales and market strategy, and your cash requirements all vary with market type. So you want to be very mindful about which kind of market you're going into. All right. Now, some of you will be lucky enough to have a single customer segment. But in fact, that's the exception rather than the rule. You're much more likely to have multiple customer segments. So, for example, let's continue with Google. Google has at least 2 market segments, right? One market segment is the people who use Google for search. The other market segment is the advertisers who want to advertise on Google and want access to those customers. This is important because every customer segment really has its own business model. It certainly has its own value proposition. It has its own revenue streams. In the Google example, folks who use Google for search don't provide any revenue at all. They don't pay Google. They provide extremely valuable data. And we'll talk about, when we talk about revenue streams in workshop 2, we'll talk about how those things get monetized. But that segment doesn't provide any direct revenue, whereas the advertisers, the second segment, provides much of the revenue that powers Google. You also want to think about multi-sided markets. Clearly, in the Google example, this is a multi-sided market. You have to have both. You have to have the massive users of Google to attract the advertisers to come to Google. So without either of them, Google can't work. Which one do you start with? That's a tough problem. There are lots of startups with multi-sided market. Invariably, you have to do both. You often need a critical mass of users before you can build your web-based venture. So the answer to which one do you start with is you probably have to start with both. All right, let's do one quick example then of a multiple segment market. The device in this picture is a bedside communication terminal for neonatal intensive care. So what you see here is a nurse who's using this device. It's a way for parents to communicate with their children in an intensive care unit. Often children who are in intensive care stay in intensive care for months. And if parents live remotely, it can be difficult for them to get to see their children frequently. And in fact, outcomes for children in intensive care improve dramatically with the amount of interaction they have with parents. So this is a way to help parents get access to their children in the intensive care unit using telecommunications services. So let's think about this marketplace. Now it's in an intensive care unit where there are nurses, there are doctors, there are administrators who run the hospital. There are people who purchase equipment for the hospitals. There are technologists who have a say over what kind of technologies can go into the intensive care unit. So there are lots of market segments to consider for this product. And in fact, in general, in the medical and medical device markets, you're often going to have a very complicated set of customers and customer segments to deal with. So let's think about this particular one. Who is the customer in this case? All right. So who is the user of the product? Okay, so there is a user. The user in this case will typically be the nurses or on one end, and then the parents who use it from at home. So there are 2 users. Who is a recommender? There will be people who have a say in whether or not the hospital buys this device, and there are several of them. Most of the users, sometimes outside folks. So for example, neonatal intensive care units are often funded by outside foundations who make charitable donations. Those folks will have a stake in recommending this product. Who is the decision maker? Who actually decides whether or not the intensive care unit will buy a product like this? Typically, it's the director of that intensive care unit. Usually it's a doctor who's the head of all the doctors who work in that unit. Is there an economic buyer, somebody other than the decision maker? Who writes the check? Again, for this piece of equipment, this is considered capital equipment. It has to be approved by the chief financial officer of the hospital. He's ultimately the economic buyer. Are there influencers? Lots of influencers. The nurses, the parents, almost every stakeholder here will have a say and will be able to lobby for or against this product. And in fact, there may be saboteurs. There may be people who don't want this technology in the intensive care unit for a variety of reasons. They may find it competing with their job and their skills. They may find it, they may judge it not to be helpful for the patients and patient outcome, and they may work actively to sabotage the deal. So each one of these is an archetype. You want to think hard about what role the people in your complex customer segments play. Look for users, look for buyers. Those oftentimes are different people. Those two distinctions are important. Think about the influencers, think about who the ultimate decision makers are, and bear in mind that customers in your customer segments come in different varieties. All right, so let's recap what we have so far. You've decided you want to create a startup, and we're recommending and coaching you to use the lean startup method to do that. We want you to find a business model. So the first thing, what your startup is going to do is to find the business model that works. You are going to do that by specifying it and then testing it with customers. That process is one of hypothesizing, testing, and then iterating over and over again, writing down what you think, meeting with customers to see if it's true or not. If it is, keep it. If it's not true, revise it, and keep iterating until you get the entire business model pinned down. We're going to use a tool called the Business Model Canvas, and you'll see more of that in the subsequent workshops. And then finally, we've started today in the two most important elements of the Business Model Canvas: customer segments and value proposition. All right, now let's shift. I'm going to ask my colleague Jim Chung to come up, and we're going to go through an example from a case study from a company called Agametrics.
Hi, I'm Jim Chung, and I'm the Executive Director of Innovation and Entrepreneurship at the George Washington University. So, I'm going to be talking today about Agametrics, which is a case study that illustrates the power of the customer development approach that we're advocating here in the new venture competition. Agametrics is a company that I invested in probably about 12 years ago or so. And back then, we did not have the customer development approach. So we made lots of mistakes. And what I'd like to do is talk about those mistakes so that we can learn from them and see how the power of customer development would have really helped me move that company faster. So let me tell you a little bit about Agametrics first before I go into the details. Agametrics was a company that was spun out of MIT and Cambridge University, where some electrical engineers had developed a way to improve electrochemical sensors, not by improving the chemical side of electrochemical sensors, but by improving the digital signal processing there. So that was their initial technical advance. But the issue was, well, now that we have this advance, where can we use it? And so what they did is they looked at the market and they tried to figure out where should we apply this technology, where would be most effective? And they went out and unfortunately they found out that diabetes is a huge problem worldwide and growing rapidly. So the idea came, well, we should address the market for blood glucose monitors to help diabetics. So this is where they ended up. Now, the initial value proposition for Agametrics and this new technology that they had developed is that we can make blood glucose monitors way more accurate. At the time, the typical blood glucose monitor in the consumer market was about 80% accurate. What Ogamatrix was able to do is figure out how to make this a consumer electronic blood glucose monitor accurate to about 99.5%. So you can see from the slide here that we spent a lot of time and money and effort into doing clinical trials and studies to prove that our technology could get up to 99.5% accuracy. But when we went out to market with these findings, we found out that actually consumers and potential partners didn't care about the accuracy. The accuracy wasn't something that was a problem in the consumer market at that time. 80% accuracy was good enough. So we found out that customers just didn't care about the increased accuracy that the technology could bring about. So we went back and we thought, what can we do here now that we found out that our customers don't care about accuracy? So this is when we started more of a customer development process, but not nearly as well organized or as scientific an approach as what is available nowadays with all the work that's been done with lean startups, Steve Blank, Eric Ries, et cetera. What we did, though, is we did go out and we started to interview lots and lots of potential customers and partners. And we were able to start putting together what we thought and what we found from our customers that they really cared about. So what were the things that really caused them some pain? What were the things that were real gain creators for them? And then we ranked them according to relevance and according to frequency. And by relevance, I mean how strong is the pain? How powerful is the gain that was created? And by frequency, I mean even if it may not happen often, even if it may not happen deeply, the pain, it may happen often enough that it becomes a bigger pain. So for example here, we found that in terms of relevance, or what customers cared about most, was the cost of the test strip. The test strip is the little disposable part of the metering process where you apply the blood and then you throw it away afterwards. A diabetic may be using 2 or 3 or 4 of these every day. And so the costs obviously add up quite a bit. So that was their biggest pain. They wanted to have a cheaper test strip. On the gain creation side, another thing that we found out was that the speed of the meter was really important. People did not want to sit around and wait for 20 seconds in order to get their readings. They wanted something that was very quick. So you can see by looking at the slide that there were a number of value propositions that we had originally had not thought about because we weren't experts in the blood glucose area. We were experts on the digital signal processing. So this was all stuff that we had to learn. And if we had the customer development process back then we would have done that first before spending all that time and money on developing a product and a technology that really wasn't relevant at the time. All right, so what I'd like to talk about now is what was mentioned by Lex earlier as the minimum viable product. And I want to emphasize the fact that a minimum viable product is not the same thing as a prototype. So what I have on the slide here is actually the first prototype, working prototype of the Ogamatrix blood glucose monitor. You can see it's not something that you would bring around to a customer and say, hey, do you want to buy this? It's clunky, it's ugly, it's just not functional. So this was our prototype that we were able to make to prove that it worked technically. But what we used as our minimum viable product is this. Now this is what we brought around to really kind of get people on board and sell them into the idea that this was something that they needed to have. Now this is not a working prototype. This is a styrofoam block with a sticker on it. The reason why that we were able to kind of put it in the hands of customers and really kind of explain how it would work and how it would bring the cost down. You see the nice big large display. This was what would attract customers into actually saying, oh, I can see how I would use this. It's not necessarily a working prototype, but they didn't need to know and see the technology. What they needed to know is understand the vision. So this is what was used to actually sell the product. And then this is the first meter that came out from Ogamatrix. And you can see it's not exactly the same as the MVP, but this is what we were able to start selling on a broader scale. So in this slide, you can see what the value proposition is today. The key features that our highlighted when the product is now on the market, you can see that the value propositions we had found earlier on through our customer development process are now the key features that are advertised now. You don't see accuracy on there, even though that was what we originally thought was really important. So the story of Augamatrix is really a story of how customer development is a very powerful tool. With customer development, once we started going through sort of a rudimentary process at that time, of course, because we didn't have the scientific approach we have today, we quickly got to some value propositions that were very valuable for our customers, and Augamatrix was able to take off and be a very successful company today. But our initial value proposition about accuracy was incorrect, and we wasted a lot of time and money. I really wish we had the customer development process back then, because it probably would have shaved at least a couple years off and maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars off of the cost of launching Augamatrix. So you guys are lucky that we have the customer development process today, and you are learning it through the new venture competition. Thanks.
Let's finish this workshop with a list of books, videos, and other web resources that might be helpful for you if you want to dig in further, and some other resources that will be useful to you. First of all, I mentioned at the outset the Startup Owner's Manual. This is the single best book on the lean startup method. Frankly, it's more of a reference book than a reading book. It's one that you want to go to when you have questions and when you get into trouble. Also, there's an excellent article by Steve Blank in the Harvard Business Review, Why the Lean Startup Changes Everything. This is the article that really brought the lean startup method into the forefront and into prominence in the business community. On the video side, there is a course at Udacity, How to Build a Startup, the Lean Launchpad. This is a set of video modules by Steve Blank, probably 100 modules, all short, 1 or 2 minutes, that go through all of the basic concept of the lean startup method and talk about every element of the business model canvas, and goes into some good detail on how to do your customer discovery. I highly recommend this course at Udacity. The next book that you need to have in your library is the Business Model Canvas book by Alexander Osterwalder and Yves Pigneur. This is the book in which Osterwalder first laid out the business model canvas. For those of you who like video, there are 2 excellent Osterwalder videos on the business model canvas. Both of them are on YouTube. I frankly recommend the 21-minute, the longer video, but the 3.5-minute video is also excellent. Now, there are some online tools to help you do your business model canvas. You can do your business model canvas on a whiteboard with stickies, but there are good tools, one a set from Strategizer and then another set from Canvanizer. The Canvanizer, Strategizer also has a great set of video tools, so I recommend these YouTube videos from Strategizer that talk about how to go about and build your business model canvas. So for those of you who want to do some prototyping or building your minimum viable product, I recommend the online video from Tom Chi. It's from a TED Talk, and it does a very nice job on how to do rapid prototyping. Also, Osterwalder has a second book that focuses on value proposition design, primarily around the customer segments and value propositions. Again, this book also written with Yves Pigneur, and I recommend that. One of the nice tools that comes from that book is something called the Value Proposition Canvas. This large, fairly detailed, one-page document lays out a great set of questions and hints and ways to think about both your customer segments and the value proposition, the value you bring to them. This is a wonderful tool for thinking through your customer solution fit. If you want to dig in more on this notion of customer solution fit, or product market fit, which it's also called, there are 3 good articles on the web, one by Mark Andreessen, another by Sean Ellis, and a third one by Callie Albright. Again, good reading if you want to dig in further on this topic. Finally, you can always get additional information and good support resources from 3 places on campus and their respective websites, one from the Office of Entrepreneurship, one from the New Venture Competition website, and of course from the GW Upstart website. Good places for any person in the GW entrepreneurship community to go to find help with their startup. Thank you very much.